Hey, what's up internet? It's Tech Guy here with another video. This video is my annual WWDC 2015 expectations video, roughly a week before the event itself. So let's get into it. So to start with, in this video, I'm going to go over my final expectations for WWDC 2015 based on last minute rumours and what I personally want to see and all that. Take everything in this video with a grain of salt because nothing is confirmed as far as we know, apart from one or two tiny things, which I'll get to eventually, but definitely hope for the best. Also, I have a university exam on the day of the keynote itself, in the middle of the day, with the stream in Australia starting at 3 AM. If there is enough demand, I will definitely stay up and watch it and tweet live at TechGuy1212, and you definitely want to follow me there, and may do a non-narrated review very shortly after the keynote or post thoughts on Twitter or something like that, depending on the demand and how many people are interested and all that. So that's at least what I'm planning on doing. Before I get started on what I'm expecting, let's look at the invitation itself. It basically says the epicenter of change, and honestly that could mean absolutely anything, to be honest, but if you look at the real center of the square, it kind of looks like the resemblance of an Apple TV in terms of shape and the fact it's got the rounded corners and all that. And you could say, well, it's an app icon, but if you think, why is it a darker color and all that, which the Apple TV is literally a little small black hockey puck, because it's really that small. It's almost trying to hint at there will be like an Apple TV update in it, and it's probably going to be at the center of your digital life or whatever. So like it's going to be connected to your TV, but your other devices connect to it or something like that. But as for the other images around it, basically it's all just for the sake of having a colorful image. But the diamond shaped ones, they're just app icons turned around for the sake of making the image look better. And the circles, they're basically referring to the Watch OS on the Apple Watch. So to keep things moving, I'm expecting them to talk about at least the next version of OS 10, iOS, updates to the Watch OS on the Apple Watch, and a new Apple TV. So if you want to see any of these, please click on them now. Now I assume you want to hear about OS 10 10.11. So Craig Federighi, or Air Force One, will come out on stage and present the updates to OS 10 and iOS. The focus of this release is mostly heavily fixing bugs, optimizing performance and security enhancements, based on what we've heard so far on the internet. See this as more of a Snow Leopard and or Mavericks update. The name on the location, because there's been nothing confirmed and there's been no banners put up yet at Moscone West itself at the time of recording, so it could be any of these names here, but if I was to take an absolute wild guess, I would just say Ventura, from the perspective of Apple wanting to venture on the most refined desktop operating system since Snow Leopard. But that's just a wild guess. In short, what I am hoping to see in the next version of OS 10 will hopefully include fixing all the bloody internet bugs, as I've had this all the time recently. Continuity over Wi-Fi instead of Bluetooth, because then it will save the battery on your iOS devices, obviously use less power on your Mac, and it will potentially be more reliable, hopefully. Unlock Mac without password if iPhone or Apple Watch within range. Refinements to the user interface and the user experience in terms of how it all looks and how you interact with it. Performance enhancements, just generally. Unify iOS and Mac developer programs, which is something I really want to see, for a single cost of $99 each year, which in Australia it's about $150, which there's more than an Apple tax on that, but I'm saying from the perspective of, well, when Microsoft is basically giving Windows developers the opportunity to build applications for all their operating system, because it's one operating system for Windows 10, but it works on a lot of devices from phones to tablets to laptop computers to desktop computers. It's the same account, presumably, that they all use. So if Apple really wants to compete in this space and make developers enjoy their ecosystem even more and try and make more money out of everything, they need to unite these programs together, and by doing so, it will probably allow more iOS developers to support the Mac platform, and probably vice versa. Force click APIs, basically third-party APIs, in order to support that even further. And Siri activated probably via a button in the menu bar, or it could be like a keyboard secret to, I guess you could say, better compete with Cortana in Windows 10. And obviously include the Hey Siri option. And iTunes volume control for widget in the notification center, as that's something that has really annoyed me. security, even though there's been rumours going around that one of them might be there's a control centre, which would be a good idea, but I really am struggling to figure out how it would be implemented well compared to what it already is in OS 10 Yosemite. I guess it's one of those that it would be good in theory, but I reckon that's all going to come down to user experience and controlling it and all that as to whether or not it's good or bad. San Francisco font from the Apple Watch, significant performance optimization bug fixes, rootless security to make it even more secure operating system, and a new feature called Proactive, which is basically rumored to come into the iOS platform and all that, which I'll get to in a minute. It could be on the left side menu, similar to what you have with Notification Center from the right. You could have that from the left, and maybe it could sync with your iOS device or something like that. So I'm expecting the 10 new features when they come out on stage. They say we have 10 new features. The first one is yada yada yada. This is what I'm expecting them to say. Design, referring to like refinements across the OS, including the new San Francisco font. Advanced technologies, also I guess you could say referring to bug fixes and all of that. Siri, the fact that they're going to add it in. Proactive, which I'll go over in the iOS segment. Control Center, rootless security, improvements to continuity, updated iTunes with the music streaming service added, Safari in terms of general updates like they do every year, and iCloud including back-end updates. It's all the same for like iMessages and all that, like they're heavily rumoured to add read receipts for contact-to-contact messages and for group messages and all that as well, and to better compete with storage pricing updates and all that, especially in response to Google releasing Google Photos with free unlimited storage up to 16 megapixel images and 1080p video content and all that, and photo stream updates, etc., and all that sort of stuff. If this is exactly spot on in terms of what they announce, and the execution for all of them are great, especially Control Center, it could be the best yearly update in quite a few years that is not a heavily redesigned user interface redesign like OS 10 Yosemite was. Next, I'm going to talk about iOS 9. So the focus of this release is mostly heavily fixing bugs, optimizing performance and security enhancements. Do see it as more like a Snow Leopard update, very similar to what they'll do with this year's OS 10. The iOS 8.4 betas are based around a redesigned music app to incorporate the on-demand streaming service, of which I expect to be discussed first prior to them talking about iOS 9 on stage. The things I want most include, and yes there's a lot, that's why the font is so small, is a lot of refinements to the user interface, including that ugly voice memos icon. Even though, yes, I understand it's the waveform and all that when you say Apple. Literally, that's what the waveform is. Even try it out if you want. Continuity over Wi-Fi. Unlock your Mac without a password if your iPhone or your Apple Watch is within range. Customizable control center. Customizable home screen to be more competitive with Android, split screen multitasking, even if it's just for A7 processors and newer, because the A7 processor is a 64-bit chip, so if it's a performance issue as to why it hasn't been released yet, maybe they could do it as you run two 32-bit apps side by side. Maybe that could solve the issue. Then again, if that is how they can fix it, I don't know why they haven't already. Performance and responsive improvements. Unify the iOS and Mac developer accounts. Theme store for allowing people to customize phones more. So I guess you could say better compete with like the Samsung Galaxy S6 and the HTC One M9. And I think from memory for the LG G4. A better option for reachability that has, for example, the 4.0-inch screen like on the iPhone 5S, but put it in the bottom left or bottom right corner and keep it that way until you turn reachability mode off by double touching the Touch ID fingerprint sensor home button at the bottom. And NFC developer API, so the NFC antenna across the top on the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus can be used for more than just Apple Pay. And looking over the internet, there's a lot more ideas and all that of what people want to see, and based on rumours and all that I personally now want to see based off reading them, is more icons shown per folder screen, indoor mapping and transit directions for Apple Maps, home application to basically manage your HomeKit hardware, changes to Swift to reduce the file size and use less cellular data, but I hope it's a more complete and final version of the language, because they're continuously updating the language at all time. It's making it harder for especially newer developers like myself to try and fully support the iOS platform in Swift. That's why I keep going back to Objective-C these days, or at least to learn a lot of stuff. Multi-user support, possibly they could be implementing that via Touch ID. San Francisco font from the Apple Watch, lock screen widgets, Spotlight API for third-party apps, iCloud Drive application so it works and functions similar to how Dropbox does in terms of getting to your files and all that. More customizable Do Not Disturb, a redesigned layout for Siri that is more similar to what it is on the Apple Watch, integration with Apple's on-demand music streaming service called what I believe is Apple Music, like Apple Pay, which I'll get to in a minute. Support for A5 chip devices with better performance, which may be a really big deal because if that's supported, that's basically saying that all devices with an A5 chip or newer will get at least an extra year of support out of it in terms of operating system updates, which would be really, really good for convincing people to stick with the iOS platform. And also Force Touch APIs, which will probably be embedded somewhere hidden in Xcode and all that, but it won't be made publicly available and all that until the next iPhones and all that are released. So the 10 new features I'm expecting them to announce on stage include the design in terms of refinements across the OS and the new San Francisco font, and potentially more customizable home screen, split screen multitasking, maps in terms of transit directions and indoor mapping, Safari in terms of general improvements like they do every year, advanced technologies in terms of better responsiveness, performance and fixing bugs, a new keyboard, which I heard there's a rumour going around that they're going to be redesigning the keyboard, time will tell. Hopefully it has swipe built into it, the home app, for controlling your HomeKit devices, Siri, improvements in general, Apple Pay in terms of adding support for it to work in Canada and implementing a new rewards program, which there's been some rumours about. And then there's this proactive thing, which if you don't know, proactive is basically it's a pimple cream thing in America, but that's not where I'm trying to go with this. The point is, if you know what Google Now is in the sense of how you can get to your information a lot quicker and all that, basically it's trying to be almost a direct copy like that, and it might have some augmented reality features built into it and all that. This is just based off what I've read on the internet so far, but I've personally never seen the need for something like this, but it's one of those, if they could convince me that it's good and all that, even if you can't turn it off, which I hope they will give you the option to turn it off if you don't like it, then it would be, I guess, a really good addition to the operating system. So that's iOS 9. Now I'm going to talk about the Watch OS. So the addition of the following is what I'm expecting from the Watch OS update, presumably version 1.1. Native third-party app support, resulted in not needing an iPhone to be connected, so it will help loading times and all that. Most requested features for changes from users of the watch to make people recommend it to friends and family more, which will result in more sales, which is what Apple wants, especially their shareholders. Significantly better performance or better way of sending information to the watch from the iPhone. Maybe it could be like peer-to-peer Wi-Fi, similar to how they do it with AirDrop. Maybe they could do something like that between your iPhone and the Apple Watch, because we know they both have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi hardware built into them. Now, if you know what the Code Conference is via Recode, which was bought by the company that also runs The Verge, Jeff Williams, who is the operations chief officer and all that at Apple currently, during the conference, he basically announced that the Watch SDK will be available at WWDC, which is for all the developers to learn about and all that, which we obviously knew it was going to come because they said it was going to come this year. But it's now definite that they're going to be talking about it in the WWDC. I mean, I was 99% sure it was going to happen anyway. I'm only expecting this whole Watch OS segment component to be a small part of the keynote itself, but enough so they can learn a few more things about it and say that it's doing well and all that, especially compared to Android Wear. So that's basically the Watch OS. Next, I'm going to talk about the Apple TV. This is the one hardware product, besides the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus, that I am most interested in. But I'm interested in possibly getting an Apple TV if they do a lot of good stuff to it, because I've been holding off for at least a year or two now. There may be a hardware update, but likely no Ultra HD or 4K support, which Full HD is 1920 by 1080. For Ultra HD and 4K, you would double those numbers. But expect it to be around the same size or slightly larger than what the image is in the top right corner there. It should have an A7 or A8X processor in it, depending on how much horsepower, I guess you could, processing power, they want to put in it. An updated remote with a microphone for Siri support, and possibly Force Touch on the remote for control similar to how on the Retina MacBook you can click your finger in on the fast forward and rewind buttons and all that, and depending on the amount of pressure you apply depends on how much faster it actually fasts forward and backwards. I reckon that would be a massive feature just on the remote itself. It could cost anywhere from US $99 to $199 because they reduced the third generation down to $69 US. With a quick release, and third generation will probably stay around as the cheaper alternative, but they'll encourage people to get the fourth generation because it may be the only one that has third-party app support, which will be massive for the TV industry. And I honestly can't say enough that people will be underestimating how big this will be. Update the user interface that is easier to navigate. The TV streaming service, I've even read about it this morning, basically saying that it's almost definitely not going to be announced, and you can't help but think, well, if they were going to announce that, are they going to have the time to do it? Because generally these keynotes don't go over 2 hours. I mean, they're going to be announcing enough stuff as it is. So they're probably not going to be announcing it more from the fact that they're not going to have the content deals and all that up and ready to go. But they could also possibly, when they announce it, add local TV support, which basically turns it into a better set-top box in the sense of you get all your free-to-air channels. Like in Australia, you've got Channel 7, 9, 10, SBS, ABC, but then with the TV streaming service, you'll get more like a more selected range of your Foxtel channels, if that makes sense. Apple Watch being an integral part of the Apple Watch in terms of how do you control it, possibly include a Safari application that relies on microphone for import and touchscreen remote for navigation, TV Kit APIs, or even the TV SDK, or whatever they want to call it, should be announced for developers to support and learn about all of it at WWDC, which I will get to in a minute. This will probably count as the third major thing they'll announce at the keynote, because that's what they generally do. It's always the next version of OS X, iOS, and one other thing. Now I want to talk about Apple Music. So, I am anticipating Apple's new music streaming service to be called Apple Music, with the Apple logo, as it is a new service like Apple Pay is a paying service. Apple Music is a music streaming service. It will be on demand like Spotify. There will be no on-demand free listening option, but there will be an upgrade iTunes Radio, which I'll get to in a minute. It will likely cost around $10 US a month, even though Apple wants to get it to down $8 US a month. Rumoured to include a 3-month free trial period, which would be really good to entice people to get used to using the service to then eventually pay for it. Integrated into iTunes and the music app on iOS, iTunes on iOS, and iTunes in OS X and on Windows. There's the slimmest chance it will be on Android, but if it did, I expect it to cost more per month since you're using it on an Android device as it's a non-Apple piece of hardware to give iOS users an advantage. But then again, you're probably going to say, well, why not charge Windows users more? Well, that's a very good question because they've already got iTunes supported on there and all of that, so I can't see them charging any more for people on Windows to be using it. But maybe they could be enticing people, like if you get a new iPhone 6S or 6S Plus, or a new MacBook or anything like that, after a set date, you can get like a 3 years worth of Apple Music or something. Because that's like a very small expense for them to pay, because that's only like $100 a year or whatever it's going to work out at, depending on the actual cost it is. But that could be a really good way of them going about doing it, in the sense of, well, if you really want to not use an iPhone or anything like that, sure, we'll let you use our service, but we want a little bit more for it because you haven't got the guts to pay for our iPhones. That's basically what I reckon they'll do. I am really digging the design of the music application in the iOS 8.4 betas from what I've seen on the internet. And Drake, oh my god, Pharrell Williams and David Guetta, who I'm a massive fan of, are rumoured to be guest DJs, presumably doing like mixing and adding effects and all this sort of stuff, as a typical DJ would, to a range of music that they have on offer on iTunes Radio, as a part of what the upgraded version would be. And there may possibly be a music social network with a YouTube style of sharing in terms of like likes, comments, playlists, search, and all that stuff, in terms of its characteristics. I think the rumoured name is Apple Connect, which maybe again have the Apple logo and Connect, but that would be a bit of a weird way. But I thought they would just include it all in the music streaming service itself and not have a separate name. But if it did have a separate name, this whole social network feature and all that seems to have very brief traits and thoughts in the eyes of Ping. Now, if you remember what Ping is, basically it's going to give you a hint that this will be PON. No, it's not going to be PON, but just an inside joke. That's what I'm basically expecting for the new music streaming service that they will hopefully announce at WWDC. Take all this with a grain of salt, but I really do hope that they announce this. Next, I want to talk about what we will not see. New iPhones, new iPads, new iPod Touches, a second generation Apple Watch, major Mac hardware updates. If you think any of these are going to happen, to put it lightly, it is possible that it could happen, but you don't fully understand what WWDC is. It stands for Worldwide Developers Conference. It's for the developers who create the software for their platform, and the focus of the keynote that they have at the start, and in fact the whole week throughout, is purely 90% of it is focused on software. It's not 90%, but like the majority of it is always focused on software in the sense of you're always going to be guaranteed a preview at the next version of OS X and iOS. But in terms of everything else they announce, it should have some form of a developer relevance to it. The next thing I want to talk about is from a developer perspective in terms of expectations. So this section is basically including things I would hope developers could look forward to throughout their week at WWDC, after the opening keynote and after the public sees the opening keynote. Since WWDC is not just a single keynote, it's an entire week for developers to learn and build better applications and all that. So I'm hoping to see Swift 1.3 or even version 2.0 with lots of refinements and a more final version of the Swift coding language. Xcode 6.4, 7.0 betas, depending on how big the TV kit and watch kit or SDKs are. Native watch kit or SDK to be available for developers, but not rolled out in terms of actually being able to use the stuff you make with the watch kit or SDK on the Apple Watch until version 1.2 or 2.0 is released in the future, probably later on in this year, probably around the iPhone launch, I reckon. And the Watch OS 1.1 should be released with most requested feedback from customers and reviews, and what developers personally want to see as well. And wish of making iOS and Mac developer accounts one universal fee for $99 yearly. I can't stress this enough. If Apple really wants to make developers support both their Mac hardware and the iOS platform, they need to bridge the gap in saying, well, if you just pay the one universal fee, you can support both platforms. And I reckon there will be a lot of people that will benefit from it, and if anything, customers and Apple themselves are going to benefit from it in the long run. Because the easier you make it for developers to support your platform, the more likely they are to do it. That's developing software in a nutshell. So that's what I expect for developer expectations. Now, another thing I'm showing you on the screen at the moment is the WWDC application currently running on my iPhone 5S. I've got it tethered up to my Mac as like a screen sharing thing so you can see what it is. Basically, I've gone through and starred all of these things that have basically given a name that's not directly obvious as to what it is. So it's basically saying, well, we'll release the final name for what this session is once the keynote has happened. When you look at all of this, in this application itself, in terms of this update for 2015, When I went through and hit stars for all of them, and then went in the favourite section and counted them all up, there are 185 out of the 300 sessions, 300 odd sessions, are not revealed until the actual event happens. Now, if you compare this to last year, in 2014, that number was 175 out of 300. So there's 10 more compared to last year, which I looked that up based on a previous tweet that I've done. So yeah, there's useful things for doing Twitter, as you can tell. So basically, it's a higher number than last year, which only makes sense if the SDKs for Apple Watch and the Apple TV are announced in terms of their kits and SDKs and all that, or whatever they call them. If they release those, then basically that makes perfect sense as to why it's 185 compared to 175, because the 175 were mostly based around that third pillar in terms of it's a developer release for 2014, and that's why there was a lot of those there, because half of them were for extensibility, sprite kit, scene kit, metal. It was for a lot of APIs and frameworks and all that like that. But how could you exceed that number yet again? The only reason you'd think that is if they did a developer release again and it was even bigger. Well, I honestly reckon it's because it's one or more of an additional SDK on top of what they will also be announcing for OS X and iOS 9, in the sense of it's going to be for Apple Watch and the Apple TV SDK and all that. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. The question for you, the audience, is what do you want to see most at WWDC 2015? And you can let me know by leaving a comment below, or tweet me at TechGuy1212, or even put a message on Google Plus if you want. And if you enjoy this, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future. I will hopefully do live tweeting that night. It's probably the odd thing of if I don't do it, then I'm probably going to be thinking about it during my exam of, oh, what if they actually announced and all that, and I won't be able to get my mind off it. So it's one of those, I probably want to stay up and watch it in that regard, but I'm still undecided as to whether or not I do it. But if you like this video, or if you follow me on Twitter, I'll be more guaranteed to actually do the Keynote live tweeting event itself, purely because I've got like the exam on that day and all that, and obviously uni's got to take priority, but equally I want to do this at the same time because this is what I've got a lot of interest in doing eventually, especially once I've finished uni and all that. So until next time, thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you on the other side.